What's up, my good peoples? Welcome to the Be Transformed podcast, where we're talking about ideas that stimulate wholesome thinking into identity, purpose, vision, and action. I am James Anderson, and with me is Logan Eaton and potentially Carolyn Anderson. But for now, Logan, what's happening?
Nothing.
Nice.
I just got here.
You just got here. You look so fresh.
Tractor pulls are going on.
The tractor pulls are going on. You may hear a tractor pulling something.
Did you take your kids over there?
No.
Watch anything? No.
I don't think I even understand what's happening.
Yeah, it's not really. I would like the stock, just the normal tractors, and just to see how far they can go. But when everything's all souped up, it's like, yeah, who went 1 centimeter further than the other guy? It's not entertaining to me, but.
So, is the load that they're pulling, does it progressively get heavier, or have more?
I don't even know. I think it's like how far you can go. So you're measuring like the torque and the horsepower and all that. So it's like how far can you go before it slips out. Before like the torque is not enough to keep pulling the sled.
But doesn't it, in momentum, wouldn't you gain traction?
Yeah, I don't know really how. Because I think maybe it's because it's under time and load and all that. That eventually you can only be under that much load for so long. The engine can only be under that much load for so long
Until it explodes.
But I do think that they might progressively add as you go. Like add as you go down the track. Like you get started and then they add weight. I don't know. I could be totally wrong. But after like 2 of them, it's like, okay.
feel like you've seen this before.
It would be cool to see like just 2 old tractors
Tug of war
tied together, out in the field or something. And see what happens. But this is too. I don't know. This is too organized here.
It's very organized. This, for people who don't know, this is the National Tractor Pull.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. And it goes down here in Bowling Green, Ohio. The claim to fame.
Yep.
You can see the cloud of puff of smoke go up in the sky.
Not my cup of tea.
The roar of the engine. And the announcer saying, "Full pull!"
You could do that professionally, I think. Are you sure you haven't done that on a professional level?
I might have sent him a recording once, but yeah, that and soccer. Go!
Yeah. I think I wouldn't be good at that.
At soccer?
At announcing anything.
Or announcing.
Just get distracted too easily.
Yeah, soccer, churros, peanuts.
Long moments of silence throughout the game. Nobody knows what's going on.
No. What game is this anyway?
Is it halfway through the game? Is this thing on?
Not again.
Yeah.
Nice.
So you guys are heading to Michigan tomorrow?
We are.
The beach?
Yeah, Lake Michigan. The beach over
awesome.
by Michigan. Yeah, it's beautiful out there.
That'll be fun.
Sandy beach. Nice water. No sharks.
That'd be really fun.
No salt.
Oh, yeah, it's true. It looks like the ocean, though.
Does look like, you can't see across it.
Yeah.
It's got some little waves.
Nice.
Yeah. That'll be lovely.
Great Lakes.
Yeah, they're pretty great.
Yeah, the one turns green every year. It changes color.
Yeah. You know.
It's with the seasons.
It's with the seasons, man. It's like spring.
Maybe it'll turn red and green in the
It's when the algae
Christmas
blooms.
time. Yeah. Maybe. I don't think anyone knows why yet.
Why it turns green?
Yeah. It could be a conspiracy.
Why it grows algae. Too much cow patties.
Could be a conspiracy. Could be Bermuda Triangle effects. You don't know how far those forces reach.
When they get swept up by the prime meridian, they go all across
There's
the
a
world.
lot of trade winds that could be pushing those forces up here. You never know.
You could never know.
But I think it is green, so if you're heading up to Lake Erie anytime soon, maybe, just maybe.
Don't eat your vegetables before you come.
Yeah, maybe it won't be green, maybe it will be. That's my forecast.
That is amazing. I feel like you can really, put a lot of weight on that forecast. Really make some good decisions.
Yeah.
Based upon that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, look, that's the sound of the ocean now. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you.
We're talking about Lake Erie.
Oh, Lake Erie. I did bring the ocean sound with me.
You did.
It changes colors.
Lake Erie doesn't sound like the ocean, though, probably.
It changes colors with the holidays, I think. But that's what we were talking about.
I'm glad to be caught up here.
Yeah. Nice. Well, tonight, I thought we'd talk a little bit of shift in perspective. Yeah, I was thinking about this verse this morning in Psalm 100. I'm just going to read the whole thing because it's pretty short. But it goes a little bit like this. It says, "Shout with joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him singing with joy. Acknowledge that the Lord is God. He made us and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving. Go into his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name, for the Lord is good. His unfailing love continues forever, and his faithfulness continues to each generation." And I was thinking about this this one part that says, "Enter his gates with thanksgiving and go into his courts with praise." And I was just thinking about that because this morning, I was just kind of do a little reading, and then I was just kind of had this desire to hear from God, get that little bit of strength in the guts happening there. And I, it's just interesting, right? I just think about sometimes praying and even just that real deep desire to hear from God. And sometimes that deep desire to hear from God can kind of come from a place of doubt and worry, right? Where you really you're like, oh, I could really use a little bit of reaffirmation or something, And and it's just interesting because sometimes I think about that, when I get into that kind of perspective of man, I could really use some affirmation. I could use that I don't know, just remind me I'm going in the right direction, right? I've been going, haven't been, I'm not feeling anything, I'm not hearing anything. Everything's kind of a little bit challenging, but I'm doesn't matter. It's I know I keep showing up, but then sometimes you're I don't know. You just, whatever. It's just that there's just that constant awareness of I don't want to slip into doubt. But sometimes I don't know. Sometimes, you get into that, you can get into that perspective of oh man, I need to hear from you. And sometimes it can, if you go too hard on your emotions, your perspective can get a little bit jacked up, right? And I was thinking about my kids in terms of perspective. And I was thinking about how sometimes one of the kids will get hurt and they'll get up and they'll run circles, screaming at the top of their lungs, right? They're just running around, screaming in pain. And it's just so that's their perspective. And then me, right? I'm laughing because it's hilarious. It's why are you freaking out? You know what I mean? It's just and sometimes I think sometimes, our perspective can be you're running around with your hair on fire And but like sometimes that's not, but in the, like, just like in that picture, right, my kids were freaking out, but I was like laughing because like they're panicking, but there was nothing to panic about. And sometimes you can get into this place of where like, oh my gosh, I gotta hear from God. And which is like, yes, but at the same point, there's a difference between like faith and doubt, you know, and worry and fear versus like belief and trust. And so sometimes that desire to hear from God can spin into that worry, fear, doubt. And so this morning, it just kind of just, as I'm like thinking about all these things, and I'm even just like thinking about like my approach on like how I want to kind of, you know, how I even want to like approach God with like what I'm thinking and feeling. Obviously, he knows everything I'm thinking and feeling, but at the same point, like I'm aware of how I'm thinking and how I'm feeling. And so sometimes I'll like consider, like I'll think about, like, do I need to run around with my hair, like my hair's on fire, you know? But then it's like I think about this verse, and this verse like, enter his gates with thanksgiving, and his courts with praise. And I was just thinking how like, you know, he's like, set your perspective straight. Right? Like see God correctly. Take the focus off of the doubt and put it back on like how God is trustworthy. I mean, the whole psalm, right? It's just talking about shout with joy to the Lord, all the earth, worship him with gladness, come before him with singing, right? Because he's God. We're his people. You know, we're the sheep of his pastures. His unfailing love continues forever, and his faithfulness continues to each generation. So it's like you focus on this abundance and this grace and the power and the goodness, right? This is where it's like, enter his gates with thanksgiving, his courts with praise. And I was just thinking about how that, you know, the difference of perspectives of one where you're like, you kind of freak out and worry and doubt, or it's like you're standing at the edge of jumping into full-fledged, I gotta cry out to God, and you know, like you could find yourself at the edge of wanting to jump into that. But I think like maturity is proved when it's like you're at the edge, and then you choose to remember, and you choose to think about who God is and who you are and what he said. And you know, because just because you have these thoughts of doubt doesn't mean that God has those thoughts of doubt. Just because you kind of have a perspective of like worry and fear doesn't mean like it's not a reflection of God's perspective. And so it's like if you can recognize that your perspective is different than God's, then we can adjust our perspective to his, right? And then you actually step back into reality, which is like kind of like what Psalm 100 is talking about. What do you guys think about any of that?
Do you want to go?
I can go. I think the first thing that kept coming to my mind was just that shift of perspective. You know, one, emotions don't dictate the truth. So when you feel like it's that panicky emotion,
yeah,
if you can remember the truth, that, you know, that's that whole, like, you don't have to run around like your hair's on fire, because if you actually can shift your perspective. And then that reminds me of the microscope effect, where you're zoomed all the way in and it feels like your problem is huge. But if you just like look up, it's like, oh, maybe it's not so huge. So that's what was coming to my mind when you kind of think about God, and as he's looking at us and his perspective on where we're going and what we're doing. It's just all along the journey. You know, you might hit a moment that feels like a mountain, but it's really just like a little pebble. So yeah, those are the thoughts that were coming to my mind.
Yeah, I was thinking when you said like hearing from God, it's just the thought popped in, and maybe this is weird, but like hearing is only like one of the 8 senses that you've got, or 5.
How many senses
6
do you have?
5, 6. I don't think it's 8.
There's a movie called The Sixth One. So
you have knees, elbows, earlobes.
Well, the movie The Sixth One is, I think, the ability to fly, and I think there's at least five. There's at least five senses, but that was not what came into my mind.
Oh, okay.
That just came into my mind. But if there's five senses, like you know, like maybe we put too much emphasis on hearing from God. It's like you can see God in the day or whatever, or in the process. Like the Bible talks about seeing God in nature, and I think you can just see God in a lot of stuff. But because we're sensitive people, we're always, you know, consumed by whatever the external environment's feeding us, and we kind of miss that. So you can smell stuff and taste stuff, and what's the other one? Touch stuff, and just experience God, and just, so I think, I don't know, that's what popped into my head, was like, why are we so focused on hearing from God? It's like there's other ways to hear from God, I guess. And I guess what the second thought that came to my mind was like, well, how does that happen? To me, I guess just in my experience, and this is just my opinion, is like you start, you know, counting the cost of where you want to go and making decisions and moving in a direction, and then those things you start hearing things or seeing things or tasting things or whatever the other ones were. but those things start to happen. Like you start 12. To, like, if you just start taking little steps towards something, you know, anything. I mean, I like we talk about self-development. So if you want to become somebody, it doesn't have to be this huge dream that you have, but it just might be becoming somebody that's self-aware and just wants to be a better person, or you know, whatever it is, or maybe it's school stuff or work stuff or business stuff or whatever. But like when you start using discretion to make decisions, and then you start acting on whatever those decisions are, I think then you start to like see and hear and touch and smell and taste and all that. So I think it's just like, man, we always talk about hearing, but it's like, I think I need to do a better job of this too. Is like, well, there's 4 other senses that you can, you know, experience God in, and don't limit yourself to just hearing. And to do that, I think you have to be kind of like conscious of where you want to go, using discretion to make decisions, and then having the confidence to make a decision, to then have those I don't know if I want to even call them experiences, because it's putting a label like an experience. It's almost like you're waiting for an experience at that point. Like, and if you don't feel a certain way and you don't know if it came or not, but it's like when you start moving in those directions, it's like those things are inevitable. It's just, at least that's in I guess that's how I've kind of experienced it, for lack of a better term of experience. But looking back, I can see, like, you know, when you make decisions, it's like, oh, I met this person, and we, you know, this person, you know, we needed to meet at this time so that, you know, we could help each other at this, and we might have had some great times together, some great meals together, told some great stories, and had good laughs, and it's all the senses being combined into being in that moment of time, and experiencing God. Or maybe I was at this place, and it was like that place, you know, was a place I needed to be, and it was a place in nature, and it was all that, you know, the senses were picking that stuff up, and I was experiencing God. It's just stuff like that, I guess. I think that, I don't know, the past isn't really good for much, except, you know, seeing how God's already worked and how He is working. So I don't know. That was what came into my head.
12 senses.
Yeah, no, that was all made up, but. There is at least 5, right?
I think 5.
There is at least 13.
Until they figure out how to...
13.
Until they figure out how to fly.
Yeah, that would add another element there. I like what you said about seeing God, because I do think that I think you can get caught up in this, like, I need to hear an audible voice. I need to hear this super clear answer, but seeing it's like you can look around and look in circumstances and look in details of your life and just like see God's presence in your life. Yeah. Like it's totally there. So sometimes you could maybe get zeroed in on a problem, and if you could, you know, get that fresh perspective and look outside of the problem, then you might be able to see how God is already even working that problem out. You just, you know, maybe you're not hearing this voice.
Yeah. when the environment dictates the perspective, I think that's when things start getting skewed. When your external environment starts to dictate what your perspective is, then you can't see straight, almost, or you can't see clearly.
Definitely can't feel straight.
Yeah. So not letting your environment dictate your perspective, I think, is
sure.
I mean, I've had to learn and work on for sure, because it's easy to do.
Yeah.
Well, and that's throwing faith out the window too. You know, if the boat starts to get rocky, the waves are going. You know, if you are thinking about your external environment, but you're forgetting about the faith and where you're headed and what you already know to be true.
Yeah.
But you're forgetting because of circumstances that might be happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and one thing, and this isn't like to hurt anybody's feelings or whatever, but it's just about the truth. There's that concept where you know, someone might say, oh, well, you just need to confess your need for God. And you know, I don't know. I heard it recently, and it just didn't really make any sense. And we talked a little bit about it last week, but then I was just kind of applying it to this, and just thinking it's like, all right, so in a time where you kind of get that doubt, you're like, I want to hear from God, but it's like you want to hear from God, and that's not bad, but it's like it's motivated by like fear and worry and doubt, and so some people might say, well, you need to, I don't know. You need to surrender. You need to confess your need or whatever. But it's like, and really in these times of doubt, like there's these two, like this couple verses that always just pop right in my mind whenever I'm starting to think of like, oh man, it's like it'd be really nice to have like some like the reaffirmation. Like as soon as I think that thought, these verses pop in my mind. And I think about when Peter stepped out on the water and he was walking and then he started to sink, and Jesus' response was, why would you doubt? Right? Like it wasn't like, you need to confess your need for me. No, he says, why wouldn't you believe? Like I said, come out here. Why wouldn't you believe me? Like, why would you doubt? Like that doesn't make any sense. Like, and just that perspective of like, why would you doubt? That when there's like that moment of doubt, it's like it always comes back to that faith. And I always think, well, why would you doubt? I'm like, man, because it's that same thing. You know, the disciples were, you know, they were on the boat. Jesus was sleeping. The storm was raging. Everybody's freaking out, right? Running around with their hair on fire. Wakes up Jesus. Jesus, in his perspective, right? He wasn't laughing. He was sleeping. They were freaking out. He's just, he's tired. Yeah, so he wakes up and he just quiets the storm. And he's like, why are you so afraid? Like, do you still not have any faith? Jesus' response was, why are you so afraid? It's like in those times of doubt or worry or like, oh my gosh, am I going? Because like it starts just with that thought, that just that little bit of like, well, because I haven't heard from him lately, does that mean I'm going in the wrong direction? Like, is that a sign? So that one thought like takes you off. Your emotions get connected with that, and then you just start that worry and that doubt and that fear, and that's what wants to then you want to run through those gates with your hair on fire, right? Like, God, how come you're not talking to me? If you don't talk to me, I can't do anything. You know what I mean? It's like just like, well, you know, just that desperation, but it's coming from the wrong perspective. And like in that wrong perspective, that's when Jesus, it's not that he's asleep, but in that story, it's like he's asleep. He wakes up and he's like, why are you guys freaking out? Do you still not have any faith? It's like Jesus' response, people, you know, to your doubt, to your fear, to your worry, Jesus' response is, do you not believe? Like, where's your faith? That's Jesus' response. It isn't like, hey, confess your great need. No, he says, where is your faith? That's the response to doubt, is where is your faith? Yeah, what do you guys think about that?
I was thinking, I had an interesting thought. I was thinking I thought it was interesting, but let me tell you about it. And then
we
you can
love
see.
we love your thoughts.
But I was just thinking, like, why do people say that? Like, why does that said so much? Because I've heard it a lot and all that stuff. But I just thought about that verse where it's like God was talking about sacrifice, and like in the Old Testament, sacrifice was like a repetitive thing that people did. And I think like that repetition could have, easily became something that was like that repetition of the sacrifice became something that people thought that was the way to solve the problem, was like that as long as we do this all the time, or as long as we say these things all the time, that'll solve the problem. And so it's almost like we like that repetitive thing that doesn't take any accountability or responsibility to say to somebody or to believe yourself, like confess your need to God. And it's like if somebody confesses their, prays, God, I need you. Like that doesn't take any kind of accountability or responsibility to say it to somebody or to say it to actually do it. Confess your need for God. And it's not like we don't need God. That's obvious. It's obvious we wouldn't be in existence without God. So we need that connection, but it just doesn't take any accountability or responsibility to say that. Just like the sacrifice in the Old Testament didn't really take much. It was just like slaughter this animal and you'll be atoned. So then I was kind of thinking like, well, what did God desire? And I kind of went back to that verse that says God doesn't desire, the sacrifice of these animals. He desires, I don't know what it goes on to say, but I think it was like he desires taking care of the widow and the fatherless, and he desires mercy and compassion and perseverance, and all those things take responsibility and accountability. It takes all that. So I think like when you're talking about that, and maybe this is just being a critic, but those things that like you said, like you just need to confess your need for God. It's just like something that we can repeatedly say that doesn't take any responsibility or accountability to say, and then also do all, however many times we want to confess that need for God, as if he doesn't know that, and as if, we need to keep reminding ourselves of that. But it just like faith will take some accountability and responsibility, like being on the boat. It wouldn't have been easy to stand still on the boat and just trust, but it takes some I always go back to that accountability and responsibility. Like you have to kind of be aware of what's going on and trust and all that. And I guess that's what came to my mind. I don't know. It kind of jumbled, but it's kind of jumbled out. But
word jumble. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about it doesn't take any accountability or responsibility, because essentially you're in that confessing your need instead of actually solving the problem. You're just
like that's not faith. Like confessing that need for God is not really faith. Like God, like the verse says, like this, God doesn't require this sacrifice, but you can replace sacrifice with any kind of repetitive, empty, saying or whatever. That's you're just trying to feel better about, saying something to somebody or saying something about yourself. But he requires like the things that take. He desires the things that take accountability and responsibility, and like taking care of the widow or defending the fatherless or showing mercy and compassion and all those things. And so I just think why is there a need to confess something that should, it's already true, it's already there, and it's already taken care of. And I just think there's a lot of faith requires some accountability and responsibility. And when you're on the boat and it's sinking or the waves are going crazy, it's not easy. You
think it's sinking.
Yeah. Anyways, that's what I thought.
That's like that Robin Hood Men in Tights, when Robin Hood fights Little John in the creek. And you guys don't know what I'm talking about?
I don't know that one.
Oh my gosh. Anyways,
is that a magazine?
Exactly. Anyways, so Robin Hood's fighting Little John with these, their sticks, staffs, whatever you want to call them. Bow staffs. Yeah. Anyways, Robin knocks down Little John, and Little John's like laying down in the water, and he's freaking out because he's like, I can't swim. And then like Robin, but in this one, this is more of the joke version of Robin Hood. It's like literally like a puddle. And so he stands up and then he's okay. But right from his perspective, he was like freaking out. He's like, I can't swim. But it's like the water was so shallow, you could just stand up and be fine.
Yeah.
But like from that perspective came a certain approach. But when your perspective gets adjusted, then it affects your approach. And it's just like, I consider my approach. Because I don't know. I mean, you know, if you've ever like gotten like mad at something or someone and then come to find out you didn't have all the information, and then when you learned all the information, you realize like you were mad at somebody and they didn't even do anything wrong. You know, it's like when, like if you've ever just been wrong, if you're like, no, this is how it was, and then you're like, oh crap, that's not how it was at all. Right? From your perspective. Right? So it's like when I literally consider my approach, like I'm like, awareness creates options, right? When you're aware of how you're thinking and how you're feeling, it creates options to choose which approach to take. Like, how am I going to respond? Am I going to freak out? Am I going to hang out in fear and worry? Am I going to talk from a place of fear and worry, or am I going to tap into this thanksgiving and praise and remember who God is, and I'm going to tap back into the correct perspective of reality and get out of kind of like my imagination that's been working with my emotions in that fear and doubt, and get kind of back into that that correct perspective. Because that's a real thing where, you know, you find yourself going off into a weird perspective, but you can get yourself back. And it's like every time you can recognize where you are, dude, that's huge. It's a victory because you have the ability to choose. I don't know. Like even today, there's just like a ton of things going on, and it's like it's easy to get, you know, there's like again, it's like you're just kind of at like the cliff where it's like you could jump off and just go straight, like light your own hair on fire. It's like you get so frustrated. Kids are being loud. There's these decisions, this decision, there's this in the back of your mind, this over here, and there's just all these things in your mind. I'm just thinking there is a desire to freak out. And at the same time, this is all just happening in my mind. I'm there's a desire to freak out, but then at the same time, I'm like, I have the ability to handle all this, right? I have the ability to stay calm. Like those things that are bothering me don't actually have to bother me. That's just like my perspective in the moment. And it's like, as I'm considering all this, I'm choosing the way I want to act. I'm choosing the way, you know, what I'm going to say, what I'm going to feel. I'm affecting my insides. And then by positively affecting my insides, I'm going to positively affect the outsides. But it's just all about your perspective and like gaining control of your perspective, man. It's huge because we're talking about self-discipline now, self-control. I mean, right? Which is one of the realities. It's the byproduct of life inside of God. You know, it's one of the fruits of the Spirit, but fruits are a byproduct. They don't just happen. They're qualities that are developed, and it's the fruit. It's the byproduct of the actual work of like growing in knowledge and applying that knowledge, right? It's the fruit of maturity. Because all these things like that are these fruits, man, all have to do with stability and choice, being kind, being faithful, being gentle, right? Being loving. All these things are like, these are things you have to choose, like on purpose. But yeah, growing in self-control, right? This is huge. But this is where like we start dropping these things, these incorrect ideas that really keep us from maturing. And we start grabbing hold of the truth and faith. So when you find yourself in a little bit of doubt, you don't have to worry. You're like, oh, I recognize that doubt. And now I'm thinking about, why would you doubt? Right? That's like your ability to then start retraining the way you think and start living from faith instead of fear. So it's not a big deal that you found yourself there. It's actually wonderful because now you can choose. You have the option to choose. You're not just stuck in doubt anymore. You're not stuck with the perspective of fear. You now have a choice to choose your perspective. Maybe you got the inclining to jump on the freak out wagon, but it's like, but I could also jump in the thankful wagon, right? And you get to now choose. It's like a choose your end destiny, choose your ending kind of book. You know what I'm saying?
What kind of book?
Oh, yeah. You know, the one that talks about the 20 senses.
choose an ending?
Yeah, choose your own ending.
Does it give you options?
It must. But yeah, no.
It's a made-up book.
Does it just leave it blank and just you make it up? Or you write it in? Or
I don't know. There's those books, choose your own endings.
Or there's those movies that leave it up to you to decide what happened.
Oh,
They
my
leave it
gosh.
open.
That's not worth $1 at Family Video.
But yeah, it's that whole concept of cultivating a thought. You know, it's like you could choose to look at the waves and think about all that you can't do. Or you could look at Jesus, who's sleeping peacefully, resting, which, by the way, pretty sure it's National Relaxation Day or Rest Day, according to Tropical Smoothie.
What?
Yeah, we missed out on that.
Did
we missed
you get a tropical smoothie?
I didn't, but I should have. We'll have to make up for that another day. But yeah, I mean, just the concept of being able to look at what, you know, Jesus is just resting. And he's like, why do you doubt? They're looking at the waves thinking there's no way out, as opposed to all the miracles they've already seen Jesus do. You know, he's like, why, you know, you just command the waves to stop.
Yeah.
So is that the cultivating the thoughts of maybe what you can't do or where you're stuck, or cultivating the thoughts of the problem instead of starting to cultivate the thoughts of the solution? Because you shift that perspective, you start to look at who God is, what he's already done, what he can do, you know, looking back at what history has already shown you in your own life and other people's lives, you know, and then cultivating those thoughts. So it's that awareness and then choosing to cultivate, you know, the solution, not the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's important. It's like I think it goes back to this concept of like self-discipline and even self-control, but self-discipline or self-control, right? It's self-imposed regulation. And the fun thing about like self-discipline is that I wish I had a phone that wasn't dead, but yeah, look up self-discipline. But it's like it's the ability to like hold a course or continue in a course of action regardless of the temptation to like do something else. Like you stay focused and you stay diligent in the midst of wanting to do, like feeling like doing something else, right? That difference between like, I really want to do this. Like I would like to have that done, but I feel like doing nothing. I want to read that book, but I feel like watching a show. I want this, but I feel like
Yeah, you want to hear it?
this. Yeah, go ahead.
The ability to control one's feelings and overcome one's weaknesses. The ability to pursue what one thinks is right despite temptations to abandon it.
Like literally, like you're tempted. If you're tempted, that means it's like you see a path to hop off the ship and like you kind of want to do it. But the self-discipline is your ability to stay on track even though you're like, oh my, that's kind of nice over there.
Yeah.
But like it's like you were talking about, Carolyn, it's taking that focus off that temptation or that fear or that whatever and getting it back on truth and reality and vision and purpose. But like the idea that I've been cultivating with self-discipline is just like, it's okay that you feel like doing something else. It's okay like when you don't feel like it and you show up anyway. Like it's okay to show up even though you don't feel like it. I'm not talking about like it's okay to show up with a bad attitude. I just mean it's like, man, I kind of would rather do this. I want to read but I would rather like zone out. And then you read. Like it's okay that it's hard. Like, because sometimes it can feel like, am I wrong? Is there something wrong with me because it's so hard? Is there yeah, like you could start getting into like fear, doubt, and worry because it's like, this isn't easy. Or it's like, because it's not easy, maybe that's not the way you should go. But no, self-discipline is actually, you know you're in it when you feel like doing something else, but you're doing the very thing you committed to. You're doing to the very thing that you actually want. Because like, man, we actually freaking want to grow in maturity. We want to take massive amounts of action. We want to create these beautiful things. We want to turn these ideas into realities. We want to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. But it's like, we feel like just doing what we've always done. We feel like doing the normal thing. Even though we want to do these other things, we still just kind of feel like hanging out in our old habits. But it's like, the thing about self-discipline is like, it's okay to start to get into the things you actually want, even when you don't feel like it. Like, you're not wrong when you feel like doing something else, but you show up anyway. It's like, there's something wonderful in the fact that it's okay that you feel like you show up anyway. You don't want to do it, but you show up, and then you keep showing up, because those are the people that get labeled successful. There's the people who keep showing up when they don't feel like it, who train themselves to keep showing up regardless of what they feel like. But that's the same thing with perspectives. If you find yourself wanting to run in a bad perspective, you don't have to, though. Like, you're not enslaved to that habit. Maybe you're used to going down that path of fear, worry, anxiety. Maybe, like, you're like, man, I'd really like to worry about this for a good hour, really picture all the worst case scenarios, all the terrible things that could happen to my kids and my life and my family and my house blowing up. Or
That's pretty extreme.
Yeah, you could use your 16th sense and get into hope and faith and trust, right? Like, no, man, here's where we're going. Here's what we're doing. And you just shift your focus and shift your perspective. Because when you do that, then you shift your whole approach to life. So you got to choose that focus, choose that perspective. Enter those courts with thanksgiving. What? The gates with thanksgiving and the courts with praise. Right? On purpose.
Yeah.
No,
I was just thinking about being thankful. That is that whole perspective thing. You can choose what you're focusing on. There will always be something to complain about. There will be, if you're focusing on that, if you're looking for the lack. But if you're looking for what you have and you think about thankfulness, it's like sometimes you have to shift that perspective and really. Sometimes you got to look for it. Other times it feels more obvious, but just having that perspective of thankfulness instead of grumbling.
Yeah. I think getting to the point of like, I'm going to enjoy the process, even if it drives me insane.
Yeah.
I'm going to enjoy the process. Like, I don't know, there's a lot of trying to put it into words, but like being on the ship during the waves, it's like forcing yourself to be like, oh, this is going to be a really fun boat ride. Just having like this unwavering trust. It's like, yeah, I'm just going to enjoy it regardless of all of this stuff. And yeah, just choosing to enjoy it. Because then you don't want to get to where you set out to go to and look back and be like, wow, I handled that really poorly.
Yeah.
I handled that whole process really bad. And I wasted a lot of time, a lot of days worrying about stuff that like eventually worked out. Yeah. And so, yeah, just choosing joy. I think that's one of my biggest things I'm trying to do right now. Is just choose to enjoy the process, even if it like doesn't make sense and it almost drives you insane. But choosing to enjoy, because you don't want to waste that time.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
You can waste a whole lot of time circling around some problem or just today talking about some house project.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, wasting perspective here when you just jump out of that circle.
Yeah.
Choosing, that was a silly example, but choosing to focus on the right thing and not waste your time focusing on the wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, it's only so many hours in a day. And yeah, you just hate to look back over the day or the week or the month and just be like, man, 90% of that was just me worrying about stuff that eventually got worked out.
Right.
But,
Right. Well, that's where it's like when you start taking account of that and you start like basing your decisions off your experience, right? Where you start to see the patterns of like, all right, well, I worried about this, but then I worked it out. Like I figured it out, or it was a process that was going to take time, and me worrying the whole time in that process didn't actually accomplish anything.
Right.
And so it's like, if you can see that, then you can see the next time, well, it's like, all right, well, this doesn't make any sense to worry about it. So you work then the goal is to work on just like letting it go, not focusing on it, not putting your energy there or your imagination or emotions. Yeah. But yeah, I was listening to Grant Cardone today in a book called Sell or Be Sold. And he's just talking about, he's like, be the most positive person in the room. Like, be the most positive person in the room. It's like, those are the people, that kind of mentality, those are the people that kind of see opportunities and take them, right? When you're constantly pessimistic and just like, ooh, like everything's hard, this is too much work, I'm too tired, right? I mean, you're just going to kind of like, you're going to see the potential, and you're going to see the opportunity, and you're going to turn it down on purpose because your mindset sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody else, I was listening to something and it went to the tune of, what was that movie we were watching last night? He said, and he was even just talking about like a weekend. He's like, when something ends, then something begins. Like when something ends, then something new begins. And I was just even thinking about it like day to day, right? Because it's like, even with a job maybe you don't want to do, or like something you got to do the next day, it's like, no, this is still like yesterday ended, like, and this new day began. Like, I don't need to walk around downcasted in this brand new day that holds full of potential, right? But your perspective could be so focused on the thing you don't want to do that you totally forget about all the things that you do want to do.
Yeah, for sure.
So perspective, man, it matters. That perspective shift.
It's huge.
Yeah. And when you start deliberately choosing your perspective, oh my gosh, you just became in control of your life. When you choose how you're going to think and how you're going to feel, and then you like flesh that out, even in the midst of a temptation to like light your hair on fire and scream and run around in circles, there's that temptation. But when you consider it, you're like, well, that's an option.
That doesn't take any accountability or responsibility.
But it's like, that eventually you're just going to get over it. You're going to put your hair out. You're going to take a couple deep breaths. You're going to get over it. So if you're going to get over it anyway, then it's not even worth it.
Yeah.
Like, keep your hair, take a deep breath now. You know what I mean? I mean, like, break the cycle of like the bad perspective and continue to jam in the correct perspective. But yeah.
Yep.
I was just thinking about this I was just thinking about this thought. I was just like, God is interested in doing something. Sometimes I'll get caught, there's this idea where it's like, I don't know, like you think about David, you think about Joseph, these guys, right? David was anointed king, but then he wasn't king for like years. Joseph had a dream to be, essentially a higher up. And that junk didn't happen for years. Right? So sometimes I think about that process of time. And it's like, just in terms of like taking action versus, oh no, you got to wait because everything's got to take time. But then I was just thinking, I was like, man, God's like ready to do something. You know what I mean? It's like, he's like ready for somebody to be like, dude, I'll do it. And then do it. Like, God's ready. It's just in that perspective, right? God's ready to use you. God's ready for you. Let's say this in a different way. God's ready for you to grab hold of the things that he's been talking to you about through these things you've been thinking about and dreaming about and yearning about. Like, God's ready to get into these things. Like, cultivate that kind of perspective. Like, the great change is about to take place. jump into it.
Right on.
Yeah. Come on, somebody. My good peoples, until next time, keep it real. Peace. Guys, thanks so much for sticking around. If you're new to Be Transformed, make sure you subscribe and then hit us up at teambetransformed.com where you can find everything you need to live a life that says all day, I keep it cultivated. If you're not sure what that is, make sure you check out the video and then join the movement. Until next time.